Are you working in psychedelics or taking steps to get involved? Lately, we've been thinking about the future of this field, the people who are going to work with psychedelics, and how they're going to show up. So we decided to ask them. Here's what we heard from people in a new survey who are working in psychedelics right now or preparing to launch their careers. 87.6% have been influenced by their own positive experiences with psychedelics. While 47% are incorporating psychedelics into an existing career, 31.6% are switching careers entirely. And not surprisingly, making money is not the goal. A staggering 98.3% of respondents indicate that making a lot of money is not their primary motivation to enter the field. If you're curious to learn more about this growing space and perhaps find your place in it, we're inviting you to download our new 24-page report, The Emerging Psychedelic Workforce. It's packed with insights on the field you won't find anywhere else, and it's completely free. You can find it in the articles section of our website at psychedelicstoday.com/article titled The Emerging Psychedelic Workforce.
Hey everyone, David here. I'm sure you've noticed that every passing year, psychedelics are becoming more accepted into mainstream culture, and many people all over the world are asking themselves, how can I get the foundational knowledge and skills to build a meaningful career in psychedelics? Well, that is exactly where Vital comes in. Vital's our 12-month multidisciplinary psychedelic practitioner training program. It's deeply comprehensive, inclusive, and most of all, transformative, both personally and professionally. Our graduates have gone on to do many wonderful things in the psychedelic space, and here are 6 real examples of what some of our alumni did with their Vital experience. Opened up a ketamine therapy clinic, got accepted for a PhD about ayahuasca, built a retreat center, launched an entheogenic church, started their own coaching and wellness practice, and launched a psychedelic media and merchandise platform. So if you are feeling the call to join this movement, you need to apply before December the 20th. Classes start January 23rd. Please head to vitalpsychedelictraining.com to download our full course curriculum, check out our teaching team, and receive your application form. You can also check out our events page at psychedelicstoday.com to sign up for an upcoming Vital Q&A session or join an expert-led topical taster webinar. Find out whether Vital is the transformative journey that you've been looking for.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show we have Dr. Dana Lerman. How are you doing today?
I am awesome. How are you?
Doing wonderful. You know, it's funny. You live in Colorado, but you're all the way back where I'm from in New England right now. So I'm actually getting a little nostalgia thinking about beautiful.
It. I don't want to show you the view. You'll really...
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, but you're in Breckenridge, so...
Yeah, poor me.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to dig in and do a little bit of background, but I guess first, like, what are you up to in this space currently? I know you've got a lot happening, and then we'll kind of rewind the tape and dig into who you are, your background.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot happening. I hope I don't miss anything really important. I would say the most salient thing that I'm up to now is I co-founded Skylight Psychedelics, as you know, where we're national prescribers of sublingual ketamine to be used in licensed and trained therapist offices. And we also offer training to those therapists that we're working with. So that's the main thing that we're doing now. I also have some fun projects that I'm working on in terms of bringing psychedelic peer support services to emergency rooms. So I'm working with a hospital in Colorado down in Denver and collaborating with some other organizations trying to make that a reality. And we are really in the final stages of making that happen. So that's very exciting.
That's outstanding. That's the first time I've heard that concept. Not the first time I've felt the need for that concept, but it's the first time I've heard somebody actually name it out loud, and that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important. I think that, the more, after we decriminalized in 2019 and then again in Denver and then now statewide in Colorado, we really feel like we're going to start seeing an uptick in people presenting to emergency rooms, similarly to when cannabis was legalized, really. And this is something that is a really important thing to be able to offer the community. And it's, when people are struggling, whether they're at home having a psychedelic experience and their friends are worried, or there are services like Fireside, for instance, which is amazing. You're struggling with an experience, you can call them. They have hours of, operation, and it's also on the phone. And when you're with someone in person, I think this is a really great adjunct to have in addition to what Fireside is doing, I think. And having people who are trained in this field is also a critical part. So we have people who are going to be volunteering on an on-call basis in the emergency room. So once a patient comes into the hospital and is identified as struggling with a psychedelic experience, then that will activate the on-call system and they will be there to support them throughout the journey. So, because obviously, as you can imagine, presenting to an emergency room while you're in a psychedelic experience, even if you're having you can be having also a medical issue, right? You could be having a real medical issue while you're on a psychedelic medicine. But just because you have a medical issue doesn't mean you're also still in a journey. So we think it's really important to support people in that space.
Do you know if there's anybody doing CME for ER docs around psychedelics?
I do not. That's a good point. I mean, there's so much opportunity in this space. It's so important because
troubling amount of opportunity.
Yeah. Right. The CME thing is honestly really challenging also, is to contract with, to get CME coverage for any of the training courses. It's so expensive. So it's it's why a lot of the training courses have to be a certain price point if they're offering CME. I mean, that's a real thing. So, but the teaching of psychedelic medicine is going to end up in medical school, is going to end up in the therapy initial training, right? That's where it really should be. But until it catches on and until it's more widespread, it's going to be in these settings that are kind of more post grad experiences for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So let's rewind the tape. So where are you from? Are you from Colorado originally?
No. Guess where I'm from?
Kansas?
No. So, but I don't know. Does Kansas have an accent?
No, it's actually pretty neutral.
Yeah. So then I get that. New York. I'm actually from New York. I was born in Manhattan.
Whoops.
I was born actually in the hospital in which I did my residency, which is really fun. Yeah. Outside. Yeah.
Cool. And then, did you always know you wanted to be a doctor, or what came first, like interest in medicine or interest in psychedelics, or was it kind of in tandem?
So I would say I definitely did not always know I wanted to be a doctor. I was kind of I have no physicians in my family. I was really in a space where I didn't really think about my future very much when I was younger. My parents got divorced when I was 14. And I kind of went down that stereotypical angsty teenage route, did a lot of drugs, and actually had my first LSD experiences when I was 16. And I think I always say that those really helped to shape my character and really allow me to think kind of outside the box and look at things from a different perspective. But I went to college. Actually, when I was in high school, my dad approached me and said, I heard from someone in the town that you're doing drugs. And you're either going to go get a job or you're going to go to rehab.
Ugh.
So I decided I was going to get a job begrudgingly. And I was looking around for a job over the summer and I stumbled upon a camp, a local JCC camp. And the only positions that were left was with children who had disabilities. So this was not I did not think that this was for me at all. I decided, I don't really have many other options. I'm going to go for it. And I ended up really having the most transformative experience as in my younger years that I've had to, as a whole, because these children were just really unbelievable. And my just interactions with them on a day-to-day basis throughout that summer was really life-changing. But then after that, I decided I was going to stay longer at this camp and volunteer for a camp with children with cancer.
Mm.
And so I got paired up with this group of 4-year-old children. And this one child in particular and I really bonded. And she was suffering from a liver cancer. And turns out that her mom knew my mom. Just that's how the universe works. And after this camp, during this camp, we were completely inseparable. And after the camp, we got together because our moms knew each other. And so we spent a lot of time together. She would come to basketball games with me. We had huge fundraisers for her at our high school. And then I somehow became really interested in her alternative treatment for her cancer because conventional chemo wasn't working for her and she was dying. And her parents took her all over the world for these alternative treatments. And so that really introduced me to the field of medicine, and I wanted to become a pediatric oncologist when I was in high school. Her name was Laura, and she died when she was not even 5 years old. So I had a year with her. But that really brought me into the medical field. And so then I just kind of really changed my tune completely. I stopped doing all drugs, just cold turkey, everything, decided I was going to really, because I was looking at this 4-year-old child thinking, all she wants to do is live. That's all she wants to do. And I'm sitting here, I have this amazing life, this amazing body, this amazing opportunity to be in this space. And I'm just, at that time, they were drugs to me, these things, these substances. I was using them to just check out of whatever I was feeling. And so I really just decided to go down the field of medicine. And by that time, I had already kind of ruined a lot of my opportunities to go to a college that would get me into a reasonable, medical school in the United States. So I had blown that chance. So I ended up then going to high school and to college. And I remember being in my college dorm, like struggling with, am I going to go be a doctor? Am I going to go into my family business, which was manufacturing? And I had a long conversation with my father. And out of that conversation, I really decided that the family business is not for me. I'm going to go down this field of medicine. And I ended up going to a Caribbean medical school on a 5 square mile inactive volcanic island called Ceiba. And then I ended up, luckily, being able to transfer out of that experience. And I went to Mount Sinai Medical School. Mm. And so it was through that whole experience that I really got into real medicine, into the field of medicine. And I still am in touch with Laura's mom today, which is really awesome.
Oh, that's beautiful. And
even more beautiful is that in ayahuasca ceremonies, she visits me regularly. Yeah, as the guardian of my soul.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Which is wild. So, yeah, so that's really the story of how I got into medicine. But when I got to medical school, I really started. I decided I wasn't going to be a pediatric oncologist because I didn't know anything about all the other fields. And then so I learned about all these other fields of medicine and really fell in love with the field of infectious disease. I cared for my late uncle's friends who were dying in the hospital of AIDS. And I really became very interested in HIV and in all infectious diseases. And so I did a fellowship in infectious disease at Albert Einstein, and then I became an infectious disease consultant. So I worked in that field for over a decade and then was an ID doctor in the middle of the pandemic.
Were you at a hospital for the Denver COVID situation or? Yeah.
So I was at Rose Medical Center, which not a lot of people know that Rose was one of the first hospitals in the country to be hit with coronavirus patients. And I was on the first calls with the CDC. Initially, when COVID happened, the CDC was hosting these live phone calls with physicians who were really on the front line seeing the patients. And so it was me and some providers in Washington, California, and New York. And over time, that phone call grew and grew, and then they just muted everybody because it was too many of us. But I remember just speaking about what we were seeing, and it was really, to be in a space where you have such an enormous skill set, but you're not able to use anything. You can't treat anybody. So you're really just, these people were coming in, and you didn't even know what to say to them because you didn't know if they were going to live or die. You just knew that you were going to do the best that you can. So it was really hard. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we had a policy where it was one physician and one nurse per patient. So the consultants were oftentimes not in the room with the patients. We would call them on the phone and we would talk to the team. So most of the pandemic in the initial stages, I wasn't even physically in the hospital, which was really hard as an infectious disease doc trying to treat a patient from a telephone and a conversation with other physicians. So, and I felt that I had a duty to be in the room and to see patients. And so then some of my colleagues were going out to California when the morgue trucks were outside the hospitals and the shit was really hitting the fan there. So I decided to go out there. I felt like I had to do that. And that was probably the most traumatic experience of my lifetime. Really rough. But yeah.
Yeah, it was a scary time. So before we leave COVID, some flare up right now happening, at least in America, and it's an interesting disease, right? Virus, and what I actually lived through a pretty crazy situation with it. My partner became like radically disabled for 2 years after her infection. Seemed like it precipitated a extraordinary nervous system and probably hormonal kind of dysregulation system wide. Yeah, for multiple years. It was horrible to watch. So I'm the guy in the psychedelic movement going like, at first I didn't care, and then all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit. Like this is fucking crazy. And I saw people like still doing ayahuasca together mid COVID. I'm like, guys, like you're going to kill people. And you probably did. And like, it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. I probably should have gone to the hospital when I had it. Barely survived here. But I liked the experience retrospectively, but it was wild.
Yeah, I think that people really don't understand unless they have a personal experience. It's an incredibly challenging concept to wrap your head around and to really understand the gravity, especially with our media and how everything is always breaking news and you never know who to believe or who to trust. It unfortunately just became this thing where unless you had a personal experience, you really just didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it's still hurting people, right? There's some long-term consequences. Like I'm actually regularly concerned about cardiac risk still as a result of my probably 3 or 4 infections. So I'm like, okay, good. Is this how I'm going down?
I know.
Whatever.
I hear you. And it's, it's a reminder. I mean, it's a reminder that your life is fragile, right? And you're susceptible. You're susceptible to macro things and these microorganisms that are, obviously be really detrimental to a whole entire society of humans.
Right. And I was seeing people going to South America doing like ayahuasca, San Pedro tourism during that same period. And like to me that just looked like, I don't care about these people and they're probably, just the cost of doing business if they get sick and die. So I'm like, getting pretty dark about it. But I'm also like, it helped me get really disheartened by the psychedelic movement as a whole. I'm getting cussed out as being paternalistic,
right?
All sorts of fun stuff like that.
I hear you, and I actually, I was one of those people who went to an ayahuasca retreat in the middle of the pandemic as an infectious disease doctor. So I was with you in that space. And what happened was I waited until the vaccines came out. I got vaccinated. I went to a retreat center that was doing COVID testing. I knew that like my risk of getting coronavirus existed, but I also felt very confident that the vaccines were going to be protective for me. And this was like round one vaccine. So I had 2 vaccine doses, and then I went. And I remembered sitting there in the Maloka, and the shaman in this practice, when they're doing blessings on you, they come over and they basically they're drinking something and they spit it all over you in prayer, right? So there's me, an infectious disease doc who has a lot of control issues, a lot, right? But that is what I needed for my own to liberate myself from that tight control that I had. So it's a wild story, really, that I even allowed myself to do that.
Mm. That's interesting. And you knew that you were going to get spit on like that
No,
ahead of time? Oh, okay.
no
That
idea.
was a fun surprise.
Fun
Mid
surprise.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, fun surprise. But that's what I needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, that's interesting. And thanks for sharing that. It's yeah, something that I think we need to really consider, like long term, folks in the psychedelic space. Like, how can we do as little harm to these populations as possible who might have got the vaccine last, right? And like, there's so much complexity with this whole story. The story wasn't told very cleanly, and as a result, opinion spiraled out of hand. And then, we have a pretty clear understanding of AIDS for the most part right now, or HIV, but like not so much popularly with coronavirus still. So yeah, it's got a long way to go.
It's got a long way to go. And, I think it's really, it's so interesting to be able to have had that modern medicine training and kind of upbringing, and then be dropped into this space where it's completely the opposite, right? Where it's spiritual and you're connecting with your inner healing intelligence. And it's this whole other field of medicine and healing that I never even ever tapped into as a healer, right? Like the modern medicine approach is really, I am the doctor. I have this medicine. Here you take it, and I am healing you. That's what's happening. But in psychedelics, as you know, that's not at all what's happening. Because the people that are oftentimes the people that are sitting with the participants in ceremony and sharing that medicine, they've done their own work. They know exactly what it's like. The playing field is really leveled. Like, we are the same, right? We're the same because we've all had trauma. We're all working through our own stuff. And then it's this idea that I'm offering you a medicine and a safe space to use this in for you to do your own work, right? It's like that key to unlocking your bag of shit. And the medicine is the key to unlocking it, but you got to sift through it and you got to do the work. And so it's really been the most rewarding experience of my whole medical career, and really just like life as a human being, because I know that I'm supposed to be in this space. I know that the route that I took, well, albeit it was very circuitous and weird, but I feel very much so that I am in the space that I'm supposed to be in and took the path that I needed to take to get here. Because I would never have been able to appreciate all these different parts of it if I didn't go on that exact path. And so what's come to me recently in ayahuasca ceremony is that part of my role in this space is really to bring intention and to bring ceremony and the inner healing intelligence and that concept to the modern medicine space, right? I mean, there's so many places for improvement in modern medicine, like even if you're doing a surgery, we have a few minutes for a timeout so you can check to make sure that's the right patient and it's the right limb you're going to amputate. But we don't have a moment to talk about who this person is and the intention of the surgery and what we want for this person. Like, we've like just had this disconnect, and this disconnect is just this, like, it's this, obviously it's not just in medicine, it's in everywhere, right? It's our food, it's our community,
All systems. Yeah.
all
It's
systems.
tough. Yeah.
So
I think medicine doesn't take the critique the best out of all the fields. It seems like medicine is the most resistant to like helpful critiques like this.
it is, but all it takes is for is for some of us to start doing the work on ourselves, and then you bring it and you just share what your experience is, and you may not be able to open up everybody's eyes and mind, but doctors and nurses and people in healthcare right now are struggling, just like everybody else, right? But really struggling because I'm sure in your day to day, you're not witnessing constant trauma after trauma after trauma, right? But when you work in a hospital and you go and you're having that experience, every single room you go into, someone is hurting.
Mm-hmm.
You got to really be able to unload that. Otherwise, you're going to pop. And that's what I mean. Physician suicide rate is through the roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know so many clinicians just quitting. Like they're like, I don't need this in my world. Like, why would I want it?
Totally.
And that's, we're not in the situation globally where we can afford to have that many clinicians dropping out.
No,
so really need to think carefully about that.
We're really losing great healers. And, many of us went into this space because we are healers and we want to heal people and we want to help or be a part of that healing. But then the system, it just breaks you down. And so you lose that ability, or that ability really to do the work that you're supposed to be doing, because just the whole structure and just that whole container, right? I mean, we have pain medicine and SSRIs and TVs and all this distraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with having an altar set up in your hospital room? Nobody does that.
I haven't seen the peer-reviewed studies on that yet. So I was chatting with this social worker friend of mine, and she actually started. She works with primarily Black populations. She's Black herself, and she's telling folks to actually engage in ancestor worship, and like that actually being really helpful. So people actually connecting with their past, and they're given a context. Context can be healing, and I was like, you're bold, like being willing to actually bring that into your practice. But I applaud it.
Yeah, I think it's really wonderful. It's so important. And it's so important because there's so much generational work that people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's also a part of that, right? Is that there's just so much. And people are really, I mean, all day I speak to people who want to do work on themselves. They come, I'm evaluating them for ketamine. These people have had it. And they know it, and they know it's their families not doing the work. And they're just like, I'm here. I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And they know that it's going to be difficult, uncomfortable, but they also look at their children and they're like, I don't want them to have to do all this. Let me do some of it. Let me do my work. And then the thought is that the kids have less. It's really an amazing field. Psychedelic medicine is an amazing, amazing field.
Mm-hmm. And we've just scratched the surface.
Scratched the surface.
Can you expand a little bit on this like intergenerational trauma thing, like parents being able to do work and not transferring it to their kids? I think that's really important.
Yeah. So I think that parents who are suffering from anxiety or depression or control, whatever it is that's going on, the human condition, and oftentimes when they come to psychedelic medicine, they are wanting to address those issues, right? A lot of them have small children. I'll speak for myself, right? I have 3 small children. A lot of why I went to ayahuasca was because I knew, besides I wanted to heal myself of all the stuff that I've been carrying around. I wanted to shift my parenting and how to be a better parent. And I felt that if I carried my anxiety, my control, all this stuff, it just keeps getting passed down because the kids are just learning from us, right? But if you can address that, where does that come from? What is the work that has to be done around it? And do that work, your kids see it. my daughter, when I came home from ayahuasca, she was probably 7. She looked at me and she said, "Why didn't you go there sooner?" And you know what? I came back from there, and because when I was a kid, I was playing a sport or an instrument, doing something, and when I wanted to quit, I was just allowed to quit. My parents would just say, whatever, just quit. Because it's also easier for a parent when they don't have to cart you around and do all the stuff. And it takes a lot of work to get your kid to take them places and be interested and talk to them about why they want to quit and all the things. So when I started out in my controlling self as a parent, when I had my 3 girls, I set them up in like every single possible activity, and I never let them quit anything. And then I drank medicine. And then I came home and I sat down with my kids and I said, listen, I want to know what you really love and what you really like. And I want you to know that I want to support you in these things, and I will take you wherever you need me to take you for these activities, but I will not force you to do any of them. And it like changed our just dynamic. Like they know that I'm listening instead of just this like kind of iron fist, like you're doing this. And so that was just like a small example of just how I've shifted as a parent. Also, I used to do like these timeouts. Timeout is literally probably the worst thing that you could do to a child. It's saying that emotion that you have is not okay and it's ugly and I don't want to see it, put it away. Go hide yourself from me because it's not something that I'm willing to sit with you through, right? And now after doing psychedelic medicine, it's like my child's struggling or they're screaming or having a temper tantrum. I sit with them. Like it's normal to have this feeling. Let's talk about it. You know, it's okay. Tell me how you're feeling. What's going on? Instead of just like shut out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. It's really just been a very helpful tool. And, you know, it's not a magic bullet, obviously. You have to do the work. Like I have an amazing group of friends and medicine sisters that we talk about this stuff all the time. And without that, it's really hard. And not being able to integrate it with someone who knows what they're talking about is also really hard. I don't recommend that for anybody. And also, you know, anytime people are using these medicines, like I think there's a huge disclaimer that should be coming with these medicines. Like your life will be changed forever. You will never look at anything the same way again. And, you know, there's a possibility that you enter into a space where you are experiencing the vastness of the universe. And that may be very overwhelming for you when the journey is over. You need someone to talk about it with, right? Like the whole concept of integration is so important. And a lot of the places, you know, when you go and you leave the country and you're doing Aya and other foreign countries, and you have this wonderful healing container that they've created, they do this amazing work, and then you leave. And then you're on a WhatsApp chat with 20 people that you were in your journey. And then every week, someone else is dropping out. And then you're just, you know, there needs to be this like option for people to have that community. So.
So, yeah, integration obviously a big deal. Like you can just go do it. You can get change. Actually, let's back up. There's this idea of informed consent, and I've been thinking about this a lot as it relates to psychedelics, and I just don't really know that you can do a complete enough job of informed consent. And I don't know, like, have you run into that kind of question?
Yeah, I think that like the preparation for a psychedelic journey is so important. And I think that when you give an informed consent to someone, there's no way to really explain the unexpected and like the enormity of the different things that you can experience in a psychedelic journey and also to follow. It's really the kind of thing where anything can happen. the reason why we do this is because most often people are, if you're preparing and you're with people who have you right in the space, and then you have integration, that you're setting yourself up for a really successful experience where you are going to get what you wanted, or what you needed, I should say, and maybe even more. But when those things start to fall through the cracks and people are not doing the preparation, I think that really sets people up for a very challenging experience and potential issues on the back end of these journeys. And I say to everyone, I said, when you're in a supported environment, it is very unlikely that you're going to have a bad trip. That's unlikely, right? Bad trips are more like, you're at Red Rocks and you eat mushrooms and you melt into the floor and everyone turns into the devil, or someone drugs you, right? You can have a very challenging experience. But when you don't prepare somebody, or they don't trust the medicine, or they don't trust the container, then that's just like a setup for real failure. But also, in these, I just had someone the other day smoking 5-MeO, and these medicines can really show you a lot. And there's no way to know if someone's actually really going to be able to handle it.
And handle it is complex, right? Like,
Right.
perhaps the most skillful way is to not handle it very well. And
Right.
yeah, it's kind of TBD. But yeah, like, Hopkins, when they do is work you through a 16-page document, hold your hand through a 16-page document. It sounds excruciatingly boring.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't even be listening for half the time, even though I would tell them, yeah, totally. But I don't know what other people in the study do. But yeah, it's wild. In holotropic breathwork, we have a decent frame where we're like, kind of just say, hey, like anything is possible,
Mm-hmm.
like anything, and then just give a whole shitload of extreme cases
Mm-hmm.
to help them kind of like understand the scope of what I really mean by everything.
Yeah.
But and have them ask a bunch of questions too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm with you in sharing those extreme things. It's just it's important because it's just so important. I mean, I had a call with someone today who was interested in going to an ayahuasca ceremony. It was his first time, and he was asking me like, what is it like? And I said, listen, on any given night, someone's tied up outside. That's what happens. And it doesn't mean that, you never know if that's going to be you. And the next day you could be totally fine and drinking medicine again the next night, and you don't have that same experience. You can be, there's really rough experiences from the underground that a lot of people don't talk about because they don't want to scare people away from medicine. But there have been really horrible things going on out there. If you are serving medicine, you have to keep these people safe, because not only are you risking hurting that person, but you're risking hurting everyone who hears about that, because then they don't want to do it because they're afraid it's going to happen to them. So it's like, if you're serving medicine, you have a real obligation to do the right thing and not hurt anybody.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, we do need to be talking about this. So this is one of the big reasons I was a fan of the decriminalization and legalization measures, is that it can take away the shadows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you experienced the whole project, but it was really contentious here in Colorado. But I just thought, for the longest time, people must have thought I was the psychedelic police. Everybody was coming to me with all sorts of complaints.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, guys, I don't have the resources. I don't have a jail. I'm not a judge.
Mm-hmm.
Like all sorts of really crazy stuff. And like, how do we deal with that? Like, I'm sure you hear stories too.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do we actually go forward? And I think let's take away the darkness and like shine some flashlights in there and out people when it's appropriate, right? Like, don't just out somebody like crazy when you don't have good evidence and maybe their thing wasn't actually a crime or a problem. We need some infrastructure here. Individuals can't handle this skillfully enough.
I'm with you. And, so many people in our community talk about these substances as medicines, me included. They're medicines. there are not any medicines that don't come with instructions, right? If we are using these medicines this way, right, and they need to come with guidance. And I am all for decrim, but we have a lot of work. We gotta do some work here, because there's a lot of room for error, people getting hurt without guidance, real structure and guidance. And yes, people have been taking mushrooms for thousands and thousands of years and using all of these plants for many, many, many years. But this is also a very different society than it was back then. This is a totally different thing. We have cars now that we're driving. People need to just be educated. I mean, there's lots of different things can happen. And when you hear a story, something that happened in the underground, you got to share it. There has to be, I would love to start this. Maybe we could start this, Joe, where we have a place where people just share stories, something that went wrong in the underground, not to like out somebody necessarily. Obviously, if someone is really being egregious and needs that, then yes, but like a place to just learn, because we don't talk about this a lot. I mean, there are people passing out after psilocybin ceremonies from vasovagal responses, right? There's like, that's a common thing that happens that a lot of people don't talk about, right? There are people that can be in a ketamine journey and come out and then all of a sudden go back in. Like, there's a lot of stuff out there that when we hear about it, it just, if you really you care, you want other people to know about it because you don't want it to happen again. Like someone slitting their throat in an ayahuasca journey in the bathroom, right? That shouldn't happen.
That was a real story?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know of a person who was able to run away from a ceremony in the middle of Florida somewhere and ended up in some horse pastures. You know, very, very under the influence. And that's not great. And yeah, like there's so many of these stories, right? And I think that's a great idea. And what I like is it's showing a lot of bad stories, and we're not actually trying to hurt anybody in the process. Right. Like we're not trying to get retribution on somebody who is an offender, right?
Right. No, because that person where someone slit their throat in an ayahuasca ceremony of space or in the bathroom, that shaman probably where did that person even get something sharp enough to do that? Like, but we have to think like that, now that we've seen something like that happen, we have to know. You have to go. You got to, wherever your client can have access to, you have to go into that space. Can they hurt themselves in here? Can they lock themselves in this room? Someone can drown in a cup of water, right? You just can't be locking things. And also a lot of people do ceremony in the dark. Pitch black, dark. How can you see somebody who might need you, really? I get it because I've been in a ceremony in the dark as a participant. I get it, but I also don't.
Yeah. Right. So this kind of is a nice lead into accessibility and affordable access. And let's chat about that. Like, this is obviously it can be very expensive work. It can also be $20 to buy a bag of mushrooms, right? Like, obviously that's not the same as dealing with somebody with a lot of skills, but it's something that we need to consider. Like, how do you like to think about affordable access in this space? Like, you're doing your best with Skylight to get people access to sublingual ketamine in a therapeutic container, but like, where do you go, on this affordable access conversation?
I think insurance is a huge part of this, right? Insurance needs to get on the wagon here. And Thea is doing an awesome job in really trying to offer this access through employers, but it's going to take a long time also for many employers to catch on, or, not every small organization, not everyone has healthcare through their employer. Also, like, this is a thing that really, it's ideal that the insurance companies are covering this. That's number one. Number two, I think that it's important, like our practice is that we feel strongly that people should be supported with their therapist while they're on ketamine. We have clients coming to us who've used at-home ketamine, traumatized, and they come to us because they want to use ketamine again to help deal with that trauma that happened. So with their therapist, I think that, the more therapists also that can offer insurance in this space is also helpful for the clients, right? Because maybe the ketamine won't be covered, but at least their insurance would be. It's tricky because, it's really tricky because so many people, I've read so many things coming out of Oregon about the cost of a psilocybin journey. What many people really don't understand is the amount of actual work that is going on from the facilitator. Being in the presence of that, whatever is going to come up for someone, is an incredibly challenging experience for the provider. They are literally an on-call trauma doula for 6 hours and maybe even afterwards, right? Because you don't know what's coming. And oftentimes they're birthing, their father molested them and they're realizing it for the first time. Like, these are big things that are coming. So because someone is like a facilitator is doing work up front with this client, right? Preparing for the journey. Then there's the journey, which they're literally on the entire time, but not just on, but like taking in someone else's stuff, right? A lot of us can kind of navigate that and maybe not take in as much, but some people really take it in. So after the journey, facilitators have to go and do their own practice. Like, that's also time out of their life that they have to go and kind of release all of that's come in. So I just want to let people know who are really arguing about the price of it. It is a very challenging thing that it's almost hard to even put a price on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think just like anything else, I mean, it's going to take time. This stuff is it's so new. Unfortunately, it's so new in this way. It's so new, but there are a lot of practitioners who don't charge a lot. And, really doing your due diligence in learning about who the person is that's holding the space for you. And, I think what's come up for me a lot in this space is actually the concept of an expert. If we have a brain tumor, we want to go to a neurosurgeon who's been doing this for 20 years plus, is the chief of their division, got top docs 15,000 times and all the things, right? When it comes to this work, I think it's a little bit different. And I think that there are some people who have been in this, and actually there's a lot of parallels to just modern medicine, right? Because in modern medicine, you can go to medical school, you can be top of your class, you can do all the research papers, write 50,000 papers, and then you're with a patient and you're just a dud. You can't. You just can't. Some people are not at the top of their class, and then they show up and they didn't write any papers, and they're with a patient and they just are there, right? And it's the same kind of thing. So I think the concept of like the expert in the psychedelic space is really needs to be thought through a little bit more, because I think that there's a lot of people who've been doing this work for a very long time, but not with psychedelic medicine per se, like holding space and being in this mindset, but just having different tools. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I know I went off on a tangent.
No, it's good though, right? Like, there's so much there. This landscape is hard to operate, right? It's not legal largely. It can be extraordinarily expensive. You can find people to do it for you for free, but do you want those people to be doing effectively the equivalent of neurosurgery or cardiac surgery on your psyche?
Right.
I would prefer somebody with great credentials that I actually have good rapport with, as opposed to, just anybody, right? And there's a lot to it. Like, it's such hard work to be there with somebody for that long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How much is that worth? And I think it's a conversation between the facilitator and the, client, right? It should be. And there's going to be given a few more years, there's going to be a lot more of these people. And I think the overall cost will drop, but it's still, a little complicated.
Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of people who are doing group ceremony and they charge a certain amount, and that kind of, and then they allow people struggling in the community who don't have the funds to come in for free or at a lower price point. So there are that those, I know that they exist. Um, and I think that, healing in community is also a very important thing that we don't talk about a lot. And I think that being witnessed in that setting and also witnessing someone else is hugely healing in and of itself. Just kind of leveling out that field again and just knowing that we're the same, and we all have something happening. And I've just seen really, really amazing things happen for people in group ceremony. I mean, look at peyote, like peyote ceremony, right? They have the children are in the back of the teepee. Can you imagine that? Like for us, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we are so far removed from that. Like it's crazy to even try to think about our children watching us navigate these spaces, right?
Yeah. Um, I was having this conversation, I think, at the Denver conference recently, and people were just not really up for that idea,
Mhm.
even though um, it does seem like a more holistic, integrated model, way of being than, yeah, what we have now. Is like they just don't see that. It's a
Right.
secret.
Hmm.
But, culture has made it so, right? Like
Totally.
people aren't just like, this is medicine, this is my religion. They're like, um, this is actually drugs, and they feel bad about it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because culture made them feel bad about drugs. And that's
Totally.
unfortunately bleeding into people's willingness to share their healing, I think.
Yeah, and I think the children are a really important part of this whole movement, right? And removing the stigma that's attached to psychedelic medicine, because if we teach our children that these are medicines and they're not drugs, and we teach them a history of why this all happened, right? Like why did they become illegal in the first place? Which I fully understand. Like I understand why that happened, right? I mean, we were in a war. We needed people to go to the war, right? And I'm not saying I agree with it, but I understand, because the idea, right? And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or interject here at any moment. But the idea, right, is that you have people who are doing LSD or mushrooms or whatnot, and then they're not going to want to participate in a war, right? And then you have a country who doesn't have a military, and that can be very obviously very scary. So, and then also, so that I understand all of that, but I think for my own children, I mean, I have taught them all of these things. They know all the medicines, they know all the names of the medicines, they understand why I use any medicine in my life, what I'm doing with that, and they understand that medicine is medicine.
Yeah, I have to throw out a Nixon quote, or a
Go.
quote about the Nixon White House. This is by John Ehrlichman, assistant to the president for domestic affairs. And this is, I think, in here. Yeah, here we go. You want to know what this war on drugs, was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Um, did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Yeah. So, like, just to give people a little dose of counterbalance.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was about war. It was, was it a real war? Fuck knows. Cold War was pretty manipulated, from both sides. So who knows? But yeah, the drug war, and you should hear what Nixon says about the Jews in similar context, right? It's unbelievable. So it's unreal to just like realize this is our country.
It's unreal, but it's luckily the studies have restarted and the research is there and the interest in there and the movement seems very strong. I just hope it doesn't lose steam, and I hope people who believe in this continue to do the work and to show up. And it's hard. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Right?
So, yeah,
It
it's a big
is.
deal. And yeah, like, so we're recovering from a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar war on drugs. And it's going to take a lot more education than just, hey, we need to educate people. It's like, yeah, we're also having to re-educate people from a gigantic propaganda campaign that was very violent and killed lots of people. So it's not a simple education program. It's educating against the current. And I've been at it for years now. I hope other people are too. Yeah.
I'm with you. And I think it's really part of our almost job as being people, workers of medicine. And I think it's part of the job is really to educate our parents. And I can't tell you how many docs I know that sit with their parents on psilocybin and hold the
Mm-hmm.
space for their parents. It's
Yeah.
it's unbelievable
That's really interesting.
because
Huh.
we know, it's when you know how powerful a medicine it can be for someone, and you know that you can sit there with them and hold that space for them and they feel safe with you. And it's a really beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, this is similar to the child conversation, like the elders conversation is a really big one.
Hmm.
They've had a gigantic birthright removed from them, just like most of humanity had it removed from them. And, we have the opportunity now to try to bring that back and give that to people that we really care about. And that's amazing. Um, I've been really encouraged, Dana, by how many physicians are actually really risking their licenses and their freedom to
Hmm.
actually do this work
Hmm.
quietly and secretly. And I'm really encouraged that um, people inside medical institutions are doing this. And
Lots more than anyone would ever know. And it's
yeah,
because they know. And once you've seen it once, it's like it's like it feels wrong to not be a part of that. It feels like it's against your own kind of internal inner healer. It's not and I'm not, out there saying everyone should just do whatever they want. And but I think that physicians are really waking up. And I think we've been doing it all along, and I feel like maybe I'm late to the party and kind of realizing like what's actually going on out there. But I've s- I've seen what's happening, and that movement is strong, and people trust physicians, right? They
hmm
really trust them. And I think it's a really amazing thing that's going on out there, because it's like, when you see someone struggling and there's nothing else that's helping them, right? And they have to go and try all these other things, right? Where 30% of the time it's going to work. When all it's doing really is covering up the problem that we know is still under there. Everyone knows it, but it makes you feel better 30% of the time. But then you're committed to using a medicine every day, right? You're committed to likely side effects. And then the most fucked up part, honestly, something that I really, really care about, is that many people who are on SSRIs cannot feel psychedelic medicine,
hmm
even after they stop it. I cannot tell you how many people I've heard, doctors, have doctors who've said to me, I've been on SSRIs for 20 something years. I stopped a year ago. I cannot feel psilocybin. I cannot feel LSD. In my opinion, that's a real problem.
I fed a woman once 14 grams of psilocybin and she barely felt it. And it was shocking.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
real. And
yeah.
it's going to be that's a case that's going to happen, right? It's basically mother nature versus big pharma, because that's what it is. But that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And when we have federal legalization of these medicines, ultimately, like when MDMA comes, psilocybin. I argue that there should be a black box warning on these SSRIs and these other psych meds saying that you may not be able to feel X medicine if you use this medicine. Clearly, we need the data, we need the trials, we need the, someone has to be collecting this information, which people are starting to do that now. But, when you hear the anecdotal stories, often there has to be something there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've seen it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Is there a correlate? Are there other meds that will have that warning?
Yeah, I think that besides SSRIs, you're saying?
I'm just saying, like in medicine generally, are there warnings that say if you use this, these other drugs don't work? Like typically, what I see is like there's bad interactions more so than the drugs might not work.
I think that it has to do with the duration that you're on the medicine, and so like the duration of which you're on the SSRIs. And so other medicines, like there are certain antibiotics that affect your serotonin receptors, like linezolid, for instance. No one's really using that typically for a very, very long time. But all like those studies, they're going to have to come out. They're going to have to be done at some point because it's a real phenomenon. Because also imagine you pay a facilitator, God knows how much money to do a journey with you. You get there and you don't feel the medicine.
Mm-hmm.
That's like,
right. It's ugly.
Yeah. Get pissed. That's not.
She had the best results out of anybody I worked with too, which is crazy. Even despite that.
Yeah.
So
that's
fascinating.
And that's another thing, right? That's another thing, because even though you're not having the psychedelic experience, are you getting the benefits? And then what's better overall? Like, is it the psychedelic experience plus the benefits? Is it just the benefits? Who knows?
What I'm going to jump to harm reduction real quick because it's always a fun conversation, especially with a physician. So harm reduction is a complex topic in this space, but a really important one. For me, the best solution for harm reduction is a fully legalized panoply of all drugs that people want, so we don't have to resort to tainted black market sources. We know our doses, and paired with education, right? And substantial resources there. In the meantime, we have to deal with, maybe somebody can run a test on our drugs. The dance safe kits are fine, but they're not perfect by any stretch, right? Even the fentanyl test strips aren't perfect. But, how do you like to approach this harm reduction conversation around psychedelics and I guess maybe drugs more generally as well?
I think that people really need to take some responsibility, honestly, for themselves and their own use. I think that that's a part of this whole thing, just like anything else in society. You have to take on a certain amount of ownership of your experience and what you're doing and educate yourself. I do think that we really need to have free resources out there for people. So the hospital that I am working with to do this initiative with the psychedelic peer support is we will have regular community resource meetings where we will talk about psychedelics, talk about being safe, using, how to make sure your medicine is safe, this kind of effort, like preparing for journeys and the importance of integration and who you should be sitting with and whatnot. Or guiding people really in that way. I think it's just it's an overall effort by everybody, really. Right? But this whole it's really, as a physician, it's a very frustrating thing when you have a patient come to your office and you ask them if they have any medical problems and they say no. And then you ask them, are you on any medicines? And they give you this list of medicines. It's like 5 pages long. And you're like, but I asked you if you had any medical problems. Oh, well, I take all these medicines for my medical problems. And people don't even know what the medicine is for which problem. They don't know what the medicine's called. Like, this is a part of the kind of overall system problem here, is that we don't, as a society, really take ownership over our own medical choices and knowledge, right? It's a rampant issue. I mean, look at I'm going to get into how all the systems are fucked up here, Joe, but look at the school systems, right? Look at what we teach children. We teach children the biology and the anatomy and physiology of a plant before our own body, if they even get to learn that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What is that? Why don't,
Well, let's talk
right?
about canceling AP psychology in Florida, for instance. Like, pretty wild.
Mhm.
And yeah, like the educational system is absolute garbage. And it's a tough scene to even discuss, right? We need like a total structural reboot, in my opinion. And
Totally.
culture isn't ready for that conversation yet,
I know, but
unfortunately.
when people, so you and I feel like a lot of people in this medicine space feel very similarly. And all it takes is for those people to start trickling into the places where big change can happen, and then it's going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to go that way. I mean, more and more I see people with big roles in communities and jobs coming to psychedelic medicine, and that's what it takes to just make this huge kind of overhaul. But it takes time, and it's uncomfortable for all of us to sit in that and just watch it. But we also have a responsibility, like, as parents, to teach the children about what we think is important, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
much more important for my kid to learn how to change a tire and not get into credit card debt and not get pregnant at 15. Like, those are the important things. you know Whether or not her handwriting is perfect cursive, I couldn't give a shit. I want to know, like, that my kid knows these things to really go through this life and have it be easier, and talk to them
Mm-hmm.
about, I mean, like, that's a whole nother thing that we never talk about. We never even talk about as a society, is the existential.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah. And
It's crazy.
yeah. So, what is to be done? That's for people to really, I think that's the takeaway here for folks.
Yeah.
Like, really consider, like, how do we actually evolve and move forward in a good way? And carefully, but also, do we really need to be harming people, through inappropriate legal structures? Like, where should we have laws? I think it's a really important thing to consider. And did you ever read A Really Good Day? Who was that? Ayat Waldman. It's a
No.
microdosing kind of. It was a good book popularizing microdosing from a New York City mom perspective, lawyer mom, and not so instructional, but what I picked up from her that was really impressive was she actually stocks her house for her kids with test kits, fentanyl strips, condoms, like basic harm reduction supplies, so that her kids won't die.
I know a lot of parents who use psychedelic medicines who do the same exact thing.
Mm, it's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of like that kind of move.
Mhm.
I'm not familiar with it. Like, I don't have any friends that are doing that kind of stuff with their kids yet, but hopefully the cultural conversation can shift and kids can be safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll happen.
Great. I was chatting with the county up here, Summit County health department, and they're implementing a clean needle exchange, which is nice. But I was like, hey guys, like, we're having more drug ODs than like probably bloodborne infection issues from unclean needles in Summit County. Like, the clean needle in Summit County is not the problem. But like, what about drug testing? And
Right.
they were interested. And they thought of ways to make it happen. But I haven't seen anything yet. So I'm going to keep trying to follow up with them. Maybe you and I can go make a visit over to the health department
I'd love to go.
and advocate for that.
We could advocate for that. And there's so many other things to tack onto that, right? Like, you have a person who's showing up and saying, I want to do something responsibly. That person's probably open to maybe even some other things,
Mm,
some education around other things that can help them through that time.
yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Like, I'm glad you're working with the hospitals in Denver on these programs. And like, I've just been so disheartened by government generally that I'm like, I don't like, why would I even try? But we have to try a little bit here. They're the people who have the finances and can make things happen, and things do happen.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that If we all gave up, then it would go into the toilet.
So let's chat a little bit about Skylight and then kind of wrap up here. We barely got to talk about your practice.
Sure.
So what do you guys do at Skylight beyond or how does Skylight work? Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it.
Yeah. So Skylight works by any client who's interested in ketamine assisted therapy would go onto our website, fill out an online intake form, we evaluate it, and that we make sure that they have a therapist who is trained by Skylight. We have an online training course that therapists can use to get trained. So it's a relatively easy process. And it's also, we believe, comparatively pretty affordable for people. It's also all online. So it's virtual and people can just do it at their own pace. And then we meet with clients via telehealth. And then we prescribe ketamine for them to be used in their therapist's office. And we also believe in communication and connection and have a phone number at the top of our website. And we have an email so people can reach us. We are not the company that you got to keep scrolling and Googling to see the phone number somewhere. And we always encourage our clients and our therapists to reach out to us if there's anything that they need. We also, like I said, we believe deeply in community. So we have our once anyone receives ketamine through our company, they also have the ability to join biweekly. We have an integration session that's led by one of our therapists, Elizabeth Wolfson. So clients can use that at no additional cost outside of their regular therapy services. And then we have a biweekly support Zoom or case presentations where we talk to our group of therapists. We chat about topics in psychedelics, interesting, challenging cases. We talk about what happens in the underground in these places also. And that's really amazing. And then we also offer our therapists once a month. It's going to be beyond that, but once a month right now, we're offering our therapists their own integration time. Because like I said, when they're doing this work, it's a lot and they need that. And so we really just believe in this whole kind of holistic approach to this entire effort, really. And we plan to, once MDMA is legalized and, FDA approved, I should say, then we plan to be able to offer people that medicine through this same channel. I don't know what it's going to look like. Psilocybin's a whole different thing. But MDMA, we really hope to be able to do that. I'm still waiting for my MDMA experiential. I know that's been on hold for quite some time. I did the training, but I'm just waiting.
I think within the next year, they're going to open that up again.
So
it's got to be sooner than later, right? They need people.
Right. Yeah. So, and then we're also looking to open a clinical research division at Skylight where we are a research site for various psychedelic studies. So really
cool. What kind of studies do you want to do?
I'm very interested in anything with really psilocybin-based studies, MDMA, LSD, also ayahuasca, but I think I might have a challenge with that medicine in a clinical place. It really just depends. We have a journey center in Evergreen where we do intramuscular ketamine, and that environment is very conducive for psychedelic experiences. It's completely not medicalized office space. We call it a journey center. It's a huge window that looks outside. There's literally a cheetah mandala on the wall. There's sage and Palo Santo and all these different things that really remind people that, they're in a healing space and not necessarily this like medical office. So we plan to have that be the research site for various psychedelic studies, but I don't know that I would be a part of giving someone ayahuasca in a tablet. That doesn't really align with me. I don't know about the psilocybin part. I have to it depends on the study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can imagine studies that would actually be interesting, but I can imagine plenty that would be a little distasteful.
Right.
And MDMA is just fine for a lot of those studies, for sure. Yeah. Well, that's really good to know. I love knowing that you're going to do that. How soon do you think you'll be starting to execute on some research?
I'm hoping by this winter. To
great.
start enrolling people in about December. We also have the ability to do a lot of COVID research also because of my background on infectious disease and coronavirus, and really trying to maybe even do psychedelics with coronavirus. That's an an area of interest of
I
mine.
love that.
Long COVID, psychedelic support.
Have you heard of Dr. Monica Gutierrez, a leading COVID expert in UT? Yeah, she's been collaborating with my friend and colleague Court Wing a lot on long COVID and trying to understand the psychedelic implications. So I'm glad that somebody's going to be hopefully looking into that. I think it's a really big deal.
Big deal.
Well, Dana, I really appreciate you joining us today. I really hope we get to do it again. And let's try to get in front of the health department up here in Summit.
Let me know when. I'm ready.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. And more soon. Thanks.